I saved a starving Apache child. Then 3 women stayed the night with me. It was late afternoon when he decided to take the road less traveled. The sun was dipping low, casting a warm, golden light across the dusty landscape. The air smelled dry, with the faint scent of sagebrush and earth after a rare sprinkle of rain. He had always loved driving through quiet, remote areas, where the world felt untouched and calm. But today, something about this stretch of road felt different. There was a certain stillness in the air, like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. As he drove slowly along the winding path, he noticed movement at the edge of the road. Back. At first, he thought it might be a rock or a small animal, but then he realized it was a child. The figure was small and fragile, hunched over as if trying to make itself invisible. His heart tightened immediately. The child seemed out of place, too small to be wandering alone in such a harsh, empty area. He stopped the car and stepped out. The heat of the late afternoon sun pressed down on him, but he barely noticed. He took careful steps toward the child, making sure not to frighten them. He said softly, keeping his voice low and calm. "But are you okay?" The child froze, their wide eyes filled with fear and distrust. Their clothes were worn and dusty, and their small frame seemed almost too fragile to carry itself. There was an immediate feeling of sadness that clutched at him. It wasn't just the sight of hunger on the child's face. It was the loneliness, the isolation, and the sense that this small human had been abandoned, even if just for a short time. He crouched down to appear less intimidating. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently. "I just want to help." The child hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone or something to appear. Then, slowly, they took a step forward. He could see the caution in every movement, the way the child seemed to weigh trust against fear. He reached into his bag and pulled out a bottle of water and a small pack of snacks. "Hurry. Here," he said. "You must be hungry." Then, as if the hunger finally overpowered fear, they reached out with trembling hands and took the water bottle. The relief that washed over the boy, no, the child, was almost palpable. The small hand shook as they brought the bottle to their lips, drinking in long, desperate gulps. "Good," he said softly. "Take your time." The child's eyes flickered with curiosity now, and he noticed something else, an intelligence, a sharpness behind those fearful eyes. Despite the frailty, despite the hunger, there was strength in this small human. They were trying to survive, and that instinct was strong. He decided to offer more. He took some crackers from the pack and held them out. "Try these too. You need energy." The child hesitated again, then nodded slowly, taking one cracker and nibbling it.
Their tiny face seemed to relax a little, and a faint smile appeared.
It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental. It was the first sign of trust, the first connection between 2 strangers in the middle of nowhere. First, he noticed the child's clothes were torn and dusty, evidence of a long day, or perhaps several long days, spent outside. Their hair was tangled and their face was streaked with dirt and sweat. He felt a pang of guilt and sorrow, wondering how anyone could leave a child alone in such conditions, even for a moment. But he pushed those thoughts aside. Right now, the important thing was the child in front of him. "Do you want to get out of the sun?" he asked. "We can go somewhere safe." The child looked hesitant again, but after a long pause they nodded. He gently took their hand, careful not to startle them, and led them to his car. The vehicle was old but reliable, and the air conditioning offered a welcome relief from the dry heat. As he drove slowly toward the nearest community center, He kept glancing at the child. They were quiet at first, perhaps overwhelmed, but gradually curiosity took over fear. They stared out the window, watching the wide, empty landscape go by. The jagged rocks, the scrubby plants, and the distant mountains that rose like silent guardians. He spoke softly, telling the child about the road, the mountains, and the small towns he had passed through. At first, the child didn't respond, but occasionally a small nod or a curious glance showed they were listening. It was a quiet companionship, built without words, just through presence and shared experience. The journey felt long, but he didn't mind. He had learned over the years that moments like these could not be rushed. Trust had to grow slowly, like a seed planted in dry soil. Bah! He noticed the child shifting in their seat, rubbing their eyes, trying to make sense of everything. Finally, they arrived at the small community center. The place was modest but warm, with a few staff members ready to help those in need. He explained the situation quickly but clearly, emphasizing that the child was in urgent need of food and rest. The staff immediately prepared a small meal, and the child ate with quiet, almost shy determination. It was heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time. Heartbreaking because of the obvious neglect they had faced. Heartwarming because even small acts of kindness could make such a difference. As the child ate, he sat nearby, feeling a strange mix of relief and worry. Relief that the child was safe, at least for now. Worry about what would come next. Who would take care of them after this? What challenges would they face tomorrow? He realized that sometimes helping one person was not enough to solve all problems, but it was a start. Breath. He stayed there for a while, talking softly to the child, making jokes, asking simple questions to make them smile. And slowly it worked. Bay. A faint giggle escaped from the child's lips, followed by another, until he was laughing quietly too. It was a fragile sound, but it was real. It was hope. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, he felt a quiet sense of purpose. Today he had made a difference, however small, in the life of a child who had known too much fear and hunger. And somehow, in helping someone else, he felt a renewed sense of connection to the world around him, the mountains, the land, and the quiet lives that often went unnoticed. That night, as he left the community center, he couldn't shake the image of the child's eyes, wide, wary, but beginning to trust. He knew that this encounter would stay with him forever, a reminder of the power of compassion and the fragile beauty of human resilience. And little did he know, this small act of kindness, this simple choice to stop and help, would lead to events that were far beyond anything he could imagine. Brett. Something extraordinary was waiting on the horizon. Something that would transform an ordinary evening into a story he would never forget. After the child had eaten a small meal at the community center, the protagonist felt a quiet sense of relief, but he knew the work was far from over. The child, though now fed, was still clearly exhausted and weary. They had spent hours alone in the harsh sun, searching for anything to eat, and the hunger and fear had left visible marks. Their small body trembled slightly, and their eyes, though less fearful than before, still flickered with caution. He sat quietly beside them, careful not to rush anything. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." The child looked at him, their gaze searching, almost as if measuring whether they could truly believe him. After a long pause, they nodded slightly, still hesitant, but there was a spark of trust beginning to form. It was a small, delicate thing, like the first green shoots of spring after a long winter. He noticed that the child kept their hands close to their chest, gripping the edges of their worn jacket. The movement was instinctive, a shield against the world. He wanted to show them that trust could grow, that it was possible to feel safe even after being abandoned or left alone. So he took a deep breath and tried to connect in the simplest way he could. "Do you want to tell me your name?" he asked gently. Passed. The child hesitated. They seemed unsure whether speaking would be safe. Finally, after a long moment, they whispered a name, almost too quiet to hear. He repeated it softly, letting the name settle between them. "That's a beautiful name," he said, smiling. The child blinked, a tiny, uncertain smile appearing in response. For the next hour he stayed with the child, talking softly and encouraging them to eat slowly. Every bite was an effort, but slowly they began to regain some strength. He noticed that the child's movements were stiff, as if their muscles had forgotten how to move freely. But even the smallest gestures, picking up a cracker, drinking water carefully, felt like victories. Once the child had eaten enough to regain some energy, he suggested they take a short walk outside. The evening air was cooler now, and the fading light cast long shadows over the small community center. He offered his hand again, and this time the child accepted without hesitation. As they walked along the dusty path, he pointed out small details. A bird perched on a fence, the colors of the sunset reflecting off distant hills, the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. He didn't speak down to the child, but rather shared observations, allowing them to take in the world again. Slowly he saw their posture relax, their small shoulders dropping from their tense, guarded position. "You know," he said softly, "sometimes even when the world seems hard and scary, there are still little things that are beautiful." The child looked at him, curious.
Like what? They asked in a small voice.
"Bess," he smiled. "Like that bird over there. Or the way the sun sets behind the mountains. Or the sound of the wind through the trees."
Even small things can remind us that life can be gentle sometimes. The child nodded slowly, taking in his words.
There was a quiet understanding forming between them, one built not on words alone but on shared experience. The protagonist realized that trust was not given freely, especially to someone who had faced hardship and fear. It had to be earned, patiently, with small gestures of care and consistency. After the walk, they returned to the community center, and the protagonist asked the staff if they could stay with the child until arrangements were made for proper care. The staff agreed, understanding the situation, and allowed him to remain. He spent the next few hours helping the child wash the dirt and sweat from their body, combing their tangled hair and changing them into clean clothes that had been provided by the center. As he worked, he kept talking, telling the child simple stories from his own life. Funny moments, small adventures, times when he had faced fear and uncertainty. He didn't talk about the dangers or sadness he had seen. Instead, he focused on moments of hope, resilience, and kindness. The child began to listen attentively, their eyes softening, their small hands occasionally brushing against his in quiet acknowledgement. By nightfall, the child was feeling much better physically, though their eyes still carried a shadow of the fear and loneliness they had experienced.
He could see that emotional wounds were not healed by food and clothing alone.
They needed a sense of safety, of connection, of someone who would not leave, and he was determined to provide that, even if only for a little while. As the evening grew darker, he decided it was time to take the child somewhere safer for the night. He explained gently that they would be going to a nearby safe place where they could rest and sleep comfortably. The child's small hand slipped into his, this time with trust rather than fear. The simple act of holding hands was profound. It symbolized a bridge between despair and hope, between fear and safety. The drive to the safe location was quiet but peaceful. The child gazed out the window, watching the landscape blur past. He noticed how their breathing had slowed, how their hands had relaxed, and how the tension in their body had eased. He realized that trust was growing, slowly, like water seeping into dry soil, transforming it, nurturing it, bringing life back where there had been only hardship. When they arrived at the small, modest cabin that would serve as a temporary safe haven, he showed the child around. The place was simple: a small bed, a warm blanket, and a few basic supplies, but it radiated safety and calm. He encouraged the child to sit on the bed and rest.
"You can sleep if you want,"
he said. "No one will bother you here." The child climbed onto the bed, curling up with the blanket, and he could see the tension in their body slowly melting away. He sat nearby, quietly watching, making sure the child felt secure. He didn't push conversation or force emotions. He simply stayed present. And sometimes presence alone is enough to convey care, trust, and safety. Hours passed quietly. The child eventually drifted into a light, peaceful sleep. The protagonist sat in the dim light reflecting on the day. He had stumbled upon a fragile life on the edge of despair, and through small acts of care, food, water, gentle words, and presence, he had begun to make a difference. It was a reminder that even in a world full of challenges, small acts of compassion could create ripples far beyond what anyone could imagine.
He also thought about the broader reality.
Pow! How many children like this one were wandering unseen, suffering silently, overlooked by the world? The thought was painful, but it strengthened his resolve to act, to help whenever he could. He realized that sometimes it took only one person to step forward, to show care, to make a tangible difference in someone's life. And sometimes that one act could change everything. As the night settled in, he prepared a small meal for himself and quietly organized a few things for the child, making sure they would have everything they needed for a safe and comfortable night.
There was a deep satisfaction in knowing that he had acted when it mattered most,
and yet a quiet humility in understanding that this was only the beginning of a journey that would bring unexpected people, unexpected challenges, and unexpected lessons about trust, humanity, and kindness. He sat back and listened to the wind rustling outside, thinking about the quiet strength of the child before him. Despite fear, hunger, and loneliness, this small human had survived, and now with a little care, a little patience, and a little trust, they were beginning to heal. And so, as the stars appeared one by one in the vast dark sky, he felt a sense of connection, not just to the child, but to the world, to the idea that kindness, when shared, could illuminate even the darkest paths. Little did he know, this night would be only the start of a chain of events that would bring strangers together in the most unexpected way, proving that even in remote, quiet places, lives could intersect and hearts could be touched in ways no one could foresee. The night had settled in completely, wrapping the small cabin in a calm, almost magical quiet. The wind whispered softly through the trees outside, carrying the scent of sagebrush and cool night air. The stars above sparkled like scattered diamonds, reflecting the stillness and serenity of the desert landscape. Inside, the protagonist made sure the child was tucked comfortably in the small bed. Their breathing had finally deepened into steady, peaceful rhythms, free from the tension and fear that had weighed on them all day. He moved quietly around the cabin, adjusting a blanket here, placing a small bottle of water on the bedside table there. Each simple action carried a sense of care, a silent message. You are safe. You are not alone. As he finished, he sat down on a chair by the window, allowing himself a moment to breathe, to reflect on everything that had happened. The encounter with the child had been unexpected, almost like fate. One moment, he was driving through an empty stretch of road, and the next, he had been faced with a tiny life hanging in the balance. Now, the weight of responsibility rested on him, gentle yet profound, as he realized that someone had to be the anchor for this child, even if only for a short while. Bask. He could hear the soft hum of the night, the distant call of an owl, the faint rustling of leaves, the sigh of the wind. It was peaceful, but the isolation was also palpable. Out here, Miles away from the nearest town, help was not immediately available, and he was aware that any sudden complication could put both him and the child in a difficult position. But he had no regrets. The choice to stop, to help, to trust had been instinctive, and it had led to a small but significant victory. The child was safe, at least for now. Just as he began to relax, he heard a faint knock at the cabin door. His heart leaped, a mixture of surprise and caution flooding him at once. Who could be visiting at this hour, in such a remote place? He moved quietly toward the door, making sure not to disturb the sleeping child. Peering through the small window, he saw 3 figures standing in the moonlight. They were women, though he could not immediately make out much more. Each of them seemed tired from travel, and the darkness made it hard to read their expressions. Their appearance was unusual. They carried themselves with a quiet confidence. Yet there was a sense of urgency in their presence. Something about them told him that they were not ordinary travelers seeking shelter for trivial reasons. Best. He opened the door cautiously, keeping his voice calm and neutral. "Can I help you?" he asked. Bet. One of the women stepped forward. We were traveling through the area," she said softly, her voice carrying a mix of exhaustion and relief. "A storm came up and we have nowhere to stay. Could we spend the night here?"
He studied them carefully, assessing the situation. The request seemed genuine, but out here, trust was not given lightly.
Bess. Yet looking at the tired faces and the slight shiver from the cold night air, he felt a tug of empathy. He had just spent the day helping someone in need, and refusing shelter to these travelers felt wrong. "Oh, right," he said finally. "You can come in."
But please, stay calm. I have a child here, and they are resting.
The women nodded, their relief almost tangible. As they stepped inside, he noticed the careful way they moved, polite, cautious, yet clearly grateful for the small kindness extended to them. They removed their coats, shaking off dust and water from the sudden storm outside, and settled into the small living area. The cabin was modest, with a single chair, a small table, and the faint warmth of a small heater. Yet, the atmosphere felt cozy, almost welcoming, despite the unexpected intrusion. For a moment, the 3 women remained silent, each seeming lost in thought. The protagonist offered them simple seats and a cup of warm tea, which they accepted with quiet gratitude. Their presence was calming but mysterious, and he could not help but wonder about their story. Who were they? Why were they traveling together in such an isolated place? And why had fate brought them here tonight, at this exact moment? As the women sipped their tea, he glanced toward the small bed where the child slept. He felt a gentle reassurance. The child was safe, and this night, though unusual, would pass peacefully. Beth. Yet a part of him could not shake the feeling that this encounter was more than chance. It was the beginning of something unexpected, a thread of connection that would weave all their lives together in ways none of them could yet imagine. One of the women spoke first, breaking the quiet. "Thank you for letting us in," she said softly. "It's rare to find such kindness from a stranger these days." He smiled lightly, shrugging modestly. "It's nothing extraordinary," he said. "Bear. It's just the right thing to do." Her eyes softened and she nodded. "It is extraordinary to some of us," she replied. The words carried a weight he hadn't expected. There was a subtle honesty in her tone, a recognition that kindness, even small acts, could be rare and precious in a world that often felt harsh. The other 2 women remained quiet, but their presence spoke volumes. There was a sense of shared understanding among them, a subtle acknowledgement that life's hardships could be softened by small gestures of human decency. The protagonist felt an unusual warmth, a sense of connection that transcended explanation. He realized that tonight The cabin, though modest and remote, had become a haven, not just for the child, but for these unexpected visitors as well. Each of them carried invisible burdens, stories of struggle and resilience, and in this quiet space a small moment of safety and comfort could ripple outward in ways none of them could foresee. Hours passed quietly. The women began to share small fragments of their own lives, not in detail, but enough to convey the essence of their journey. There was a calmness in the conversation, a shared vulnerability that created a quiet intimacy. But the protagonist listened, contributing where appropriate, careful not to dominate, but allowing the space to become one of mutual respect and understanding. He found himself reflecting on the day's events, on the child's fragile smile, on the small victories of trust and care. And now, with these three women quietly settling into the cabin, he recognized a pattern forming. Kindness begets kindness.
A single choice, to stop and help a child, had set in motion events that brought strangers together, creating a temporary community bonded by empathy and shared humanity.
Late into the night, as the storm outside began to subside and the wind softened, they all settled into quiet routines. The women prepared their modest sleeping arrangements. The child remained resting peacefully, and he sat by the small fire, feeling a deep sense of calm. The cabin, isolated and modest as it was, had become a sanctuary, a place where trust could grow, where people could feel safe, and where the unpredictability of life brought unexpected, meaningful connections. He watched the flames dance and thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. One simple act, stopping to help a starving child, had unexpectedly created a space for three weary travelers to find shelter. Life had a strange way of weaving stories together, connecting lives in ways no one could predict. And tonight, he was witnessing one such connection unfold. Despite the calm, there was still an air of anticipation. Something about the night felt charged with possibility, as if the universe itself had arranged these encounters for a reason. The three women, though polite and reserved, carried a sense of quiet strength. The child, safe and cared for, represented resilience and hope. And he, having taken the step to act when it mattered most, felt both humbled and inspired by the unfolding events. As the night wore on, the cabin fell into a gentle silence. The child slept peacefully, the three women rested nearby, and he remained awake just a little longer, reflecting on the extraordinary turn of events. In the stillness, he understood that life often worked in mysterious ways. Sometimes, small acts of compassion could lead to encounters that would leave lasting impressions, shake perspectives, and create memories that lingered long after the moment had passed. And so, as the stars shone brightly in the clear desert sky, he felt a quiet certainty. This night, unusual and unexpected as it was, would become a story to remember. A story of trust, kindness, and the strange, beautiful ways in which human lives could intersect even in the most remote and unlikely places. The cabin was quiet now, except for the soft crackle of the small fire in the corner. The storm outside had passed, leaving behind a gentle breeze that whispered through the trees. The moonlight poured in through the windows, illuminating the modest room with a pale silver glow. The child was asleep, on the small bed, their breathing steady and calm, a stark contrast to the fear and hunger that had marked the day. The three women had made themselves comfortable in the living area. They sat close together, sharing blankets and warm cups of tea, their faces soft with fatigue, yet animated with quiet conversation. The protagonist watched them for a moment, noticing the subtle ways they interacted, gestures of care, gentle smiles, and the careful way they avoided disturbing the child. But something about their presence felt familiar, as if they carried the same unspoken understanding that kindness mattered, that small gestures could create safety and comfort even in the most unlikely places. He poured himself a cup of tea and sat across from them, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and warmth. He had never imagined that a day that began with saving a starving child would lead to this moment, sharing a quiet night in a remote cabin with three strangers who somehow felt like allies in the same human story. One of the women spoke first, breaking the silence. "You know," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper, "it's rare to find someone who stops to help just because it's the right thing to do. Most people look the other way." Bay. He smiled lightly, shrugging. "I guess I was just in the right place at the right time," he replied. "But it felt wrong not to stop. That's all." Breaths. Her eyes softened. Sometimes, doing the right thing is extraordinary, even if it seems simple. "Do you give a child hope today? That's more than most people do." Psst. The second woman nodded in agreement. "It's not just about today," she added.
It's about showing that people can care, that kindness exists. Even small gestures can change lives.
The third woman remained quiet at first, sipping her tea slowly. Then she spoke, her voice calm but deep with emotion.
"We've all faced times when we felt alone, when no one noticed our struggles. And yet someone always showed up in some way. A friend, a stranger, a small act of kindness. That changes everything." Bust. The protagonist felt a lump in his throat. Their words echoed his own thoughts from the day. He thought about the child, so fragile and weary, and the small ways trust had begun to grow.
He realized that what he had done was not just an act of help, but an opening for connection, for understanding, for empathy.
As the conversation continued, the women began to share more about themselves, not in great detail, but in small fragments that revealed pieces of their lives.
The first woman talked about her childhood in a small town, the challenges she faced growing up, and the lessons she had learned about resilience. She spoke of moments when she had felt invisible, overlooked, and yet had found strength in unexpected places. The second woman shared stories of her travels, the people she had met, and the small acts of generosity that had left lasting impressions on her. She spoke of strangers who had offered food, shelter, or simply a listening ear, and how those gestures had reminded her that humanity was often quietly extraordinary.
The third woman spoke less, but her words carried a quiet power.
She talked about family, about loss, and about the time she had found herself in situations that seemed hopeless. Yet through every challenge she had discovered that kindness, whether given or received, was the thread that connected life's pieces together. The protagonist listened, feeling a profound sense of connection. There was a pattern emerging, a common thread. All of them had experienced hardship, all had witnessed suffering, and all had discovered the power of compassion. Best. In this small cabin on this quiet night, they were sharing more than stories. They were sharing understanding, empathy, and the unspoken realization that human lives were intertwined in invisible ways.
At one point, the conversation shifted naturally to the child.
The women spoke softly, careful not to wake them, about how remarkable it was that such a small human could show so much resilience. They remarked on the courage it took to survive alone, the instinctive strength that allowed the child to keep going despite hunger and fear. The protagonist felt a swell of pride and humility. He had not done anything extraordinary, he thought, yet the child's survival and trust had been nurtured by his simple choice to help. Breath end. And now, the presence of these three women, sharing their own experiences of kindness and resilience, added layers of meaning to the night. It was as if the universe had conspired to remind him that lives intersect in the most unexpected ways, that small acts of care could ripple outward to touch others in ways no one could predict.
As the hours passed, the mood in the cabin grew more reflective.
They discuss the importance of noticing those who struggle, of taking small steps to help even when the world seems too vast and overwhelming.
The women shared gentle advice, stories of guidance they had received from mentors, strangers, or friends, and the protagonist felt a renewed sense of purpose. These conversations were quiet, intimate, and deeply moving, far more powerful than he could have imagined when he first stopped to help the child. The child, still asleep, stirred slightly and murmured in their sleep. One of the women reached over instinctively, adjusting the blanket with a soft smile, and he felt a wave of warmth. Here, in this cabin far from civilization, surrounded by strangers who had become allies, he realized the true meaning of human connection. But it was not always about grand gestures or dramatic heroics. It was about presence, empathy, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. By the time the night had grown deep and the fire had burned down to glowing embers, a profound calm settled over the cabin. The women had shared their stories, their laughter, and their quiet reflections. The protagonist had listened, contributed, and absorbed lessons about resilience, compassion, and the invisible threads that connect human lives. And the child, safe and warm, slept peacefully, embodying the hope that kindness could create security and trust even in the most challenging circumstances. Before settling into a chair by the window to watch the stars, the protagonist reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment. One simple act, stopping to help a starving child, had transformed an ordinary evening into a night of connection, learning, and understanding. The arrival of the three women, though unexpected, was part of the same ripple of compassion, proof that kindness often returns in ways no one can anticipate.
He watched the women quietly prepare to rest, arranging their blankets and cushions on the floor.
There was no need for words. The shared understanding in their eyes said everything. They were travelers who had found shelter, strangers who had found trust, and humans who had found connection in an unexpected, fleeting moment. As he finally turned his attention back to the sleeping child, he felt a deep sense of peace. The child's fragile trust had been nurtured through the day, and tonight, surrounded by warmth, safety, and shared human presence, that trust had grown. And he understood something vital. The power of kindness was not just in the act itself, but in the way it could bring people together, create bonds, and leave lasting impressions on everyone involved. In the quiet of the night, he thought about what the next day might bring. The journey of the child was just beginning, and the ripple of human connection he had helped create tonight would continue in ways he could not yet foresee. The night in the cabin had become more than a moment of shelter. It had become a lesson in resilience, a story of hope, and a reminder that even in the simplest acts of care, profound change could occur. As he finally leaned back and allowed himself a moment of rest, the cabin settled into complete stillness. The storm had passed, the child slept peacefully, and the women rested with a quiet confidence that the world, for tonight at least, had been kind. And in that stillness he realized that life often works in mysterious ways. Sometimes it is the small choices, the small gestures that leave the deepest marks, connecting strangers, creating hope, and reminding us all of the extraordinary power of simple human compassion. Morning came gently, almost like a quiet sigh across the desert. The first rays of sunlight slipped through the cabin windows, casting warm, golden patterns on the worn wooden floor. The wind was calm, carrying the faint scent of the earth and sagebrush that had been washed clean by the storm the night before. The cabin, which had been alive with quiet conversation and shared presence just hours ago, now seemed peaceful and still, almost meditative. The child stirred first, stretching small arms and yawning. Their eyes, still wide with curiosity, met the protagonist's gaze, and he could see the faint smile of recognition and trust on their face. It was a smile that said, "I am safe. I am cared for." The sense of relief and quiet joy in that moment was overwhelming, reminding him why he had stopped the day before. One simple choice, One act of compassion had made a profound difference. The three women were awake too, moving quietly around the cabin as they prepared for the day ahead. They had arranged their belongings neatly, careful not to disturb the small child or the simple order of the cabin. There was a sense of quiet respect in their movements, a shared understanding of the night they had spent together. They exchanged small smiles and soft words with the protagonist, expressing gratitude without overstating it, as if the events of the previous night had spoken louder than words ever could. The protagonist prepared a small breakfast, simple but warm. Bread, fruit, and tea. He served it for the women, offering a plate to the child as well. They ate together quietly, sharing small moments of laughter as the child's energy returned. It was a morning of calm, but beneath the tranquility was a subtle excitement. A feeling that today the choices made yesterday and the trust built overnight would have lasting effects. After breakfast, the women gathered their belongings. The time had come for them to continue their journey, and though they were strangers, the bonds formed in the cabin over the course of the night were undeniable. Breath. There was a sense of hesitation in their movements, a quiet recognition that farewells were difficult even in brief encounters.
Thank you, one of the women said softly, her voice carrying genuine warmth.
For everything. For kindness, for trust, for letting us be part of your home. Even for one night.
You don't know how much it means. The protagonist smiled, feeling a mixture of humility and pride.
Birth. It was my pleasure, he said. It felt like the right thing to do.
I hope the road ahead is easier for you now.
The second woman stepped forward, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. You've reminded us that kindness still exists, that even strangers can make a difference.
How?
That's something we will carry with us, always. The third woman simply nodded, her eyes reflecting the quiet strength and resilience they had shared in conversation the night before. Spaces. We may never meet again, she said softly. But tonight, you've changed the way we see the world. The protagonist watched them leave, stepping out into the morning light, their figures moving toward the horizon. He felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness at their departure, gratitude for their presence, and awe at the unexpected way life had intertwined their paths. He realized that this small cabin, remote and modest, had become a temporary haven, a space where lives intersected, where trust was nurtured, and where humanity's quiet power was revealed. Once they had gone, he turned his attention back to the child. Their small face was bright with curiosity, and the faint traces of the night's exhaustion were already fading. He took a moment to sit beside them, gently brushing hair from their forehead. "Are you ready for the day?" he asked softly. The child nodded. "Yes," they whispered. "Thank you for everything." He smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "Bess, you're welcome," he said. "Remember, you're strong. You're brave. And you're never truly alone. Bill." Later that morning, he accompanied the child to the local social services office, ensuring they were safe and that proper arrangements were made for their care. The staff welcomed them warmly, acknowledging the child's ordeal and offering support and guidance for the days ahead. He stayed long enough to see the child smile, genuinely this time, before reluctantly taking his leave. There was a sense of closure in knowing the child would continue their journey with safety, nourishment, and attention. On the drive back to his own home, the protagonist reflected on the extraordinary series of events. The simple decision to stop for a starving child had led to a night of profound connection, understanding, and shared humanity. The three women, unexpected travelers, had brought stories, warmth, and insight that enriched the experience, teaching lessons that would linger long after their departure. He realized that acts of kindness, no matter how small, had consequences beyond immediate understanding. One choice could ripple outward, touching lives, creating bonds, and inspiring trust in ways that could never be measured. It was a reminder that the world, even when it seemed harsh or indifferent, had pockets of warmth, moments of grace, and opportunities for connection waiting to be noticed. The memory of the night, the quiet conversations, the shared laughter, the vulnerable stories, the trust of a child, remained vivid in his mind. It was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the profound impact. Life, he understood, was often unpredictable. But it was in these unpredictable moments that the deepest lessons were learned and the strongest connections were formed. As he arrived home and stepped inside, he felt a lingering sense of hope. The world, despite its challenges, had shown him that even in the smallest acts of care, there was power. Power to transform, to heal, and to connect. And while he could not predict the future, he carried with him the knowledge that one person's choice to act with kindness could create a chain of events that would touch multiple lives, leaving lasting impressions. Days passed, but the memory of the child's trusting eyes and the three women's heartfelt presence stayed with him. He often thought about the child, hoping they were thriving, growing stronger, and finding joy. And he thought about the women, hoping their journey had continued with the same quiet grace and resilience they had shown in the cabin. In quiet moments, he reflected on the extraordinary nature of ordinary choices. Life did not always offer grand opportunities for heroism, but it did provide chances to be present, to offer help, and to show care. Sometimes the smallest gestures, sharing food, offering a hand, providing shelter for a night, could create ripples that changed lives in ways unimaginable. And so, the memory of that night, the child's fragile smile, the warmth of the three women, and the quiet beauty of human connection remained with him as a constant reminder. Compassion mattered. Trust mattered. Humanity mattered. And even in a world filled with uncertainty, small acts of kindness could illuminate the darkest corners, connecting lives and hearts in ways that endured far beyond a single night. Looking back, he understood that this experience was more than a story of rescue or hospitality. It was a story of shared humanity, of resilience, and of the extraordinary power found in ordinary choices. But the night had shown him that life's unexpected moments, when approached with empathy and care, could become transformative, creating bonds that no one could predict, but everyone could cherish. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, he felt a deep, quiet peace. The world was vast and sometimes lonely, but within it, he had discovered a truth he would carry forever. That even in the simplest acts of kindness, lives could be changed, hearts could be touched, and hope could be restored. And though the child and the women had moved on, their impact remained. The night, the conversations, and the trust built would forever serve as a reminder that human connection, when nurtured with care, patience, and compassion, was one of life's most profound gifts. In the end, he realized that saving the child was not just about feeding them or ensuring their safety. It was about recognizing the value of presence, of empathy, and of small acts that ripple far beyond a single moment.
It was about understanding that every life mattered, every gesture counted, and that the world, despite its challenges, could always be softened by kindness.
And with that thought, he closed his eyes, feeling gratitude for the night, for the child, for the three women, and for the extraordinary power of human connection that had transformed a quiet cabin in the middle of the desert into a place of hope, trust, and lasting impact.